Have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
Once again, humans are apes in the same way that a duck is a bird. So if you ask me if I've ever seen a bird turn into a duck.
Yeah, that was an interesting debate between Aron and a guy named Jesse Lee Peterson. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with either of these people. I just stumbled across this morning. It got like 45,000 upvotes on Reddit or something like that. And I went in search of it because I actually know Aron Ra. I messaged him this morning and told him that he was like Reddit famous or whatever. I assume he had no idea that this was posted on Reddit. But I want to talk about who Jesse Lee Peterson is. And then I want to watch that debate between Aron Ra and Jesse Lee Peterson. We're going to watch the entire thing. It's an hour long. Apparently it happened 5 months ago. I had no idea. August 19th, 2022 is when this took place. Let me introduce you to Jesse Lee Peterson if you don't know who this is. This is late August 2021. Should give you an idea of who this guy is and some of the ideas that he holds.
I tremble at the notion that black people are taking over our country. I tremble. Because I may not know my flower, but I know black people. And most black people, not all, but most cannot run anything. Black males, black men, and black women. They're emotional. They're unconscious. They have no love. They have no talent, no sense of leadership at all.
He is a white supremacist, obviously, right? I don't know what else to call this. Black people are incapable of running governments or being in a position of authority of any sort at all. What? He talks like he's an idiot. He speaks like he's a moron, but he is a master propagandist for the right. He runs a YouTube channel called, I think, The Fallen State or something like that. He also claims to be a pastor. And not too long ago, I talked about this when it happened, he was outed as gay by some of his ex-partners or current partners or pseudo-current partners, if you will. I mean, it's his word against theirs, of course, but there's some really compelling evidence. For example, long before his partners came out and told the world about this, his Twitter account was liking some gay tweets. So there's that. He's also extremely homophobic, in addition to being a clear as day white supremacist. Check this next clip out from him. This is early September 2021.
The governor of Virginia and whomever else involved agreed to remove Robert E. Lee statue.
So the governor of Virginia at this time in 2021 was in the process of removing a Robert E. Lee statue. You know, the one of the main generals for the Confederate Army that fought for slavery, that fought to keep the black community enslaved for the rest of time. Yeah, that guy. They wanted to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee. Listen to what Jesse Lee Peterson said about it.
A great man for a bunch of fat, black, radical...
He called Robert E. Lee a great man just now.
Radical communist, evil, Black Lives Matter, lesbian. Did you ever think, just smoke on that for a minute. Did you ever think that something like that could happen in a Judeo-Christian country like America?
If that isn't clear enough for you, that this guy's a white supremacist, listen to this, early August 2022.
I used to think that when they used that word, white supremacy, it was a negative word, but now I realize what they're thinking is that, and it's true, by the way, that white men are smarter than them, superior to them, and instead of learning...
Yeah, I mean, you're catching this? He just said It's true, by the way, that white men are smarter to and superior to, smarter than and superior to black people. Does it get more depraved than this?
Hey, how did you become so superior? They want to destroy it so that they won't be reminded how dumb they are. And so they're dumbing everybody and everything down rather than coming up to the level of white supremacy.
That's Jesse Lee Peterson. That's what he's all about. That's who he is. That's what he believes. Doesn't get much more clear than that. He's a white supremacist. If that's not enough for you, the guy refers to Donald Trump. He's like a massive Trump fan, right? He refers to Trump as the Great White Hope. Now, you may be unfamiliar with that term. It's a dated reference. But what it means, it's a reference to an old movie, apparently, where it was from a time when, you know, there was kind of segregation, whether it was legally enforced or not, I don't know. But people were segregated, and there was a black boxer that was knocking everybody out. And people were looking for the great white hope that could take out the black boxer, the white guy that would come in and save the sport from the black people. That's what that saying means originally. Jesse Lee Peterson is a white supremacist. I don't know how to make that any clearer. So let's watch the clip from Aron that I saw on Reddit, and then we're going to watch the entire debate. He talks like an idiot, but he's not a nobody. I mean, how many subbies does this dude have anyways? He's got 370,000 subbies. I think he's syndicated on the radio or something. Isn't he on the radio too? I don't know for sure. But he's not a nobody is the point. And that should be disturbing to everybody. Listen to this clip with Aron. This is near the end of their debate. It's about 40 minutes in. I don't know that we're going to get to that point today, so I wanted to play this part. Listen to it.
Have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
This question is really stupid, and it's one of the most common questions that creationists use to stump evolutionists when it's clear they have no idea what they're talking about.
Have I ever seen a dog turn into a dachshund?
No, have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
Have I ever seen a car turn into a Corvette?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is his quote-unquote interview technique. He asks ridiculous, nonsensical, dead-end questions that don't actually mean anything, that are like impossible to parse in the first place. And when you literally are incapable of answering it because it's a stupid, nonsensical question, he doubles down and triples and quadruples down and says, you can't hear me? You're not going to just answer the question? That's his tactic. He does this with every debate. It's kind of a scumbag tactic, if you ask me, but okay.
Yeah, have I ever seen a shark turn into a fish?
I didn't ask about any of those things. I asked, have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
I'm trying to illustrate the fallacy of your question.
How's that fallacy? You wrote that we're all ape. You must have.
And we are.
You
and
must
that book,
have at some point all these hundreds of thousands of years. At some point, you would have seen if an ape turned into a human being. Have you ever seen an ape?
So he just said, they were talking over each other there a little bit. Jesse Lee Peterson said, over hundreds of thousands of years, you would have seen an ape turn into a human being. Creationists don't even really use this argument much anymore because it's so nonsensical and ridiculous. Most people understand how stupid this is.
Have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
Once again, humans are apes in the same way that a duck is a bird. So if you ask me if I've ever seen a bird turn into a duck, that's kind of a stupid question.
Because I didn't ask that. I didn't ask that. I ask, have you ever seen an ape?
Is that like an inside joke with his audience or something? Why did he do that?
Have you ever seen an ape turn into a human being?
That is a nonsense question.
Why?
Because it's like asking for a place halfway between Los Angeles and California.
No.
I mean, that's really interesting. These are really interesting illustrations he's giving. Think about that. A place halfway between Los Angeles and California. Los Angeles is part of California. There is no halfway in between, right? Same with the bird and the duck thing. Have you ever seen a duck turn into a bird or vice versa? They're the same thing.
California.
No, it's not. I didn't ask about that.
I know. Well, you don't know what you asked.
I do know. You wrote this book called "We Are All Apes,"
and it gives
so
the proof
I'm
in
asking,
the book.
have you personally seen a human being, an ape, turn into a human being?
It would be impossible for a human being to be anything other than an ape, for the same reason that it is impossible for a dachshund to be anything but a dog. Have you ever seen a dog turn into a dachshund?
Why are you running from that question?
I'm not.
See, this is what he does. He's not running from anything. This is his tactic. Jesse Lee Peterson drills down on this stuff and refuses to accept an answer even when people give it, because he thinks it's a gotcha when it's not. It's a stupid question. It's a nonsense question.
I'm answering the question. I'm illustrating what's wrong with the question.
You're running from that question. You wrote this book that we are
facing you head on, answering your question directly.
No, you're not.
Humans are a subset of the category of apes.
I didn't ask you that.
We start out
you
apes.
How
we can't. So therefore, it makes no sense to ask how the parent category turns into the subcategory. It is exactly the same as asking if I've ever seen a bird turn into a duck. Do you understand why your question? Have you ever seen a bird turn into a duck? How about I ask you that question?
But that wasn't the question.
But that's the same question, isn't it?
You wrote the book saying we are. You tried to divert. You tried to deviate from the question. You wrote a book called "We Are All Apes."
This is painful, dude. It's like the guy. Nothing's getting through his thick skull. Is he listening? Does he care? I really don't think he cares. This is what he does to every interviewer. And, every interviewer or every interviewee or whatever handles it differently. Some of them just fold and say, you know what? You're right. I've never seen it. And others absolutely force him to understand and don't give up on it, like Aron Ra is doing here. It's obvious that nothing's getting through his thick skull. Nothing. It's just, is there anything knocking around in there in the first place?
And so how can you write a book that says we're all ape when you've never seen a ape turn into a human being?
Have you ever seen a duck turn into a? Have you ever seen a bird turn into a duck?
Why are you dodging the question, man?
I'm not dodging the question. I'm answering it.
No, you're not. It's like when I asked you if you love a Christian, you went all around. I answered that question. I asked you where you're going. You tell me where you've been.
That doesn't make any sense at all. What does he even mean by that? I ask you where you're going. You tell me where you've been. I mean, I understand the phrase, and it seems like a deep phrase at face value, right? That it has real meaning to it. But it doesn't. It has no meaning in this context. It's meaningless. What is he talking about? What did Aron Ra explain where he had been instead of where he was going? In what context did he explain that? It's garbage coming out of this guy's mouth. Complete garbage.
And I answered your question directly.
No, you didn't. You're not answering this.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that's a little subsection. If you want to see the entire thing, again, I'm watching it tomorrow. I'm finishing it on my Unfiltered YouTube channel, Telltale Unfiltered. But for now, let's start at the beginning of the debate and see how it went, because trust me, it got weird at a couple places. Aron Ra just lost his mind on the dude eventually. It's pretty entertaining. That wasn't even the most aggressive part, if you want to see it. Nerd Love, I just want to ask the man what the heck he thinks an ape is. He has no idea. Either he has no idea or he doesn't care. Like, maybe he does know and he simply just wants to throw out a gotcha or a perceived gotcha question and refuses to let up. Ridiculous. Wizard of Frobaz. I've taught my kids and grandkids, before answering a question, determine if the question is a legitimate inquiry. Right, yeah, there's nothing legitimate about this. But here's the thing about this guy. He's not looking for an answer, right? Jesse Lee Peterson doesn't care. But his audience does care. They are listening. And whatever Aron Ra has to say here, they are a captive audience for this. Anything that he has to say, they're listening. My thought is, how does he wrap this up and put a bow on it and package it for this audience, this listening audience, who's probably adversarial to the position, but is a captive audience nonetheless? How do you communicate with them? This dude's lost. There's no hope here for this guy. But the audience, on the other hand. Anyway, let's give this a listen and see what he has to say for himself here.
I have with me Aron. He is an author, podcaster, and former president of the Atheist Alliance of America, a nonprofit committed to raising the public awareness of atheism.
Oh, by the by, while we listen to this, we are going to play some Mario Maker 2. So, yeah, let's play and listen.
Thank you so much for being with me. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So, what is...
He says that now. Just wait till after. I bet he's not so happy to be here after that.
an atheist? Can you define what that is for me?
Oh, certainly. Throughout history, there have been a number of theologians and politicians who have been deeply concerned with one question: do you believe in God? And the answer yes means you're a theist, and this applies to any God. And the answer no means atheist, and that is the word atheism means without theism. So there are some people that want to put in other terms or color things a little bit, but that's because they're interested in philosophy and are looking for an argument.
Yeah, what he's doing here, he's referring to a guy. I'm not gonna get into it. There's somebody in the atheist community or whatever. Is it, the skeptic community, I guess you could say, in YouTube, Twitter, and that sphere, who likes to talk about the original meaning of the word atheist and stuff like that. And that's who he's referring to. It obviously often turns into an argument, but okay.
Simple layman's terms. The theist says there is a God. The atheist says, I don't believe you.
And so you don't believe, do you believe there is a God?
No.
Do you believe there is a devil?
No.
No.
I assume that Jesse Lee Peterson thought that was going to be some kind of a gotcha question, because I'm guessing the guy probably thinks that all atheists believe in Satan, but not in God.
And have you always had this belief?
Well, this isn't a belief. This is a lack of belief. And I didn't realize what belief really meant in religious terms until I became an activist myself, when I discovered that belief is an act of will. See, if I say that I believe something, it means that this is what I think is most likely true or closest to the truth, but that I don't know it because I can't show it. Whereas a believer tends to put a different spin on that. I mean, they believe as a conscious act of will to convince themselves of something that is not evidently true.
That's really interesting. A belief is something that you actively take part in, is basically what he's saying. If you actually believe something, if you actively believe it, then it plays some role in your life. It's not just something in the back of your mind normally. Yeah, kind of interesting.
And so that's what that it seems to me that believers involve more make-believe than what I would call a sincere belief. So I don't use the word believe anymore in application to what I do. I mean, I think this or that, and I'm open to change my mind all the time.
And so you have no proof that there is no God or no Satan. You just...
See, this is a tricky question. Do you have proof that God's not real? It depends on what you're talking about. If I'm talking to, like, an evangelical, the answer to that question will be very different from if I'm talking to, like, a Muslim or a Buddhist or something, right? Like, if a Christian evangelical kind of person comes in and says, do you believe that my God is real? The answer is obviously no. That is absolutely absurd, right? The claim that God hates everybody who doesn't follow his strict rules, and the earth is 6,000 years old, and he created all these animals only to kill them all shortly thereafter in a flood. That's absurd. Now, if you want to go with just kind of a moderate Protestant denomination who doesn't hate anybody for anything, old earth creationists who believe or who accept that evolution is real and that that's how God went about his thing or whatever. That's totally different, you know. That's a totally different situation. Dude, what is with all these sucky levels lately? If you assert certain things that are absolutely falsifiably wrong, then yeah, I can say I know for a fact that your God is not real. I think that's probably what Aron is about to talk about.
Do you have proof that there are no leprechauns?
No,
Do you believe in leprechauns?
no.
Okay, so if you don't have a reason to believe something, that's a pretty good reason not to believe it.
Were you a Christian at one time?
I was, because I was lied to. I was told that God was a conclusively proven scientific fact, and that to question whether there was a God was just as crazy as to question whether we really have a president. And I didn't realize for the longest time that I could even question that. And then,
Yeah, that was the same with me. I didn't even realize it was something you could question.
of course, all of the claims that not just my family's religion, but in fact any religion ever made with regard to God were always empty assertions.
So you don't know that there is no God.
No, I know that there's no God because God is not even a possibility. It's a logical contradiction.
Oh, okay.
Now, for the longest time, I was just an agnostic atheist because I didn't have sufficient information. I wasn't convinced that there was a God, but it seemed less and less likely as time went on. Eventually, I realized that the Hitchens razor is what is asserted without evidence may be dismissed without evidence. That makes perfect sense to me. And my favorite quote from Abraham Lincoln is that it is an established maxim in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood.
That's super interesting. It was kind of complex, so let me state it again in more understandable terms. Basically, what he said was, if you are right by chance about something, you weren't right about it at all. So if, a conspiracy theorist comes out here and says COVID was leaked from a lab, and it's, the month after COVID was discovered in the first place, and then, 5 years later, he discovers that was in fact the case. It's not the case. COVID was not leaked from a lab to our knowledge, but I'm just saying, if he were to discover that is how COVID came to be years later, doesn't mean he was right in the first place. He had no justification to make that claim to begin with. That's basically what Aron Ra just said in more simple terms.
Is that it is an established maxim in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood.
If you make a claim without knowing if it's true or false, it's false. You were wrong. Whether you were right or not, you were wrong. It was not justified to make that claim in the first place.
And the accidental truth of the claim does not justify or excuse him. And in fact, every religion posits baseless assertions as if it was a matter of fact. And I know a philosophy professor who says that faith is pretending to know things you don't know. And that seems an apt description. Every religion makes claims as fact that they cannot show to be true. And
I found that really interesting. Yeah, every faith does do that. Now, if you want to believe something without evidence, I get it. That's okay with me, Fine. But you got to understand that nobody else should be expected to believe that along with you.
So we would call that lying.
So who told you that there was a God?
There's a number of people that told me different versions of God.
Dude, Jesse Lee Peterson, here's another thing about the guy. He has some weird obsession with people's moms. I don't know what it is.
Although they could never agree with who God is or what God is, but they all profess to know him personally.
When you first became a Christian, who told you at that time that there was a God?
My family, of course, raised me to believe that there was a God, and then I got to see inter-Christian prejudice, because my family are one denomination, and then some other denomination would inquire as to what religion I am, and every time I knew that if somebody asked me what my religion is, there's going to be a problem.
This is a really big issue in Ireland, or it was for a long time. I believe it was Ireland. People there was a big split between the Protestants and the Catholics. Like, they absolutely hated each other. It's like Republicans and Democrats today in large part, and things got really ugly at the time. It was like a brewing civil war. Everybody expected there to be a civil war sometime in the near future, but nobody, ever knew when it was going to start, basically. And it just ended up being a series of stochastic events, stochastic terrorism against each other. These are brother and sister. These people loved each other, grew up together a lot of the time, and they were killing each other over stupid nonsense. So that's how far it can go, man. I'm telling you. Got to see each other as human beings. You got to.
Because if my religion matters to you, then we're not gonna agree on much.
And so when you say your family, are you referring to your father and mother were the first to tell you that?
He always zeroes in on the mom every time.
My mother was the first to tell me that.
It's always the mother. Why do you think it's the mother that's always telling the kids that and not the father, for the most part?
Well, it's good that you say for the most part, because here in Texas we have a lot of preachers that tend to take the helm on that. But fortunately, I didn't grow up in Texas.
Yeah, but in the home, why do you think it's the mother or the grandmother that's always telling the kids, taking them to church and telling them that there is a God? And most of the time, it's not the father, but it's the mother.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've seen a statistic that women, particularly women over 50, tend to be more susceptible to all kinds of scams and they're
I think Aron Ra's main problem in this whole bit was that he was taking the conversation seriously. I almost called it a debate. It's not a debate by any stretch of the imagination. He was taking it seriously when, there's no reason to take it seriously. It's just stupid garbage. And this guy, there's something broken in his brain, man. There's something not right in there.
they more readily believe con men and that sort of thing. I don't remember what the specific statistic was to quote it, but I remember reading that once upon a time, and I've seen that to be anecdotally confirmed.
Right.
Yeah. My mother was always religious, and she, fortunately for me, my family had a tradition that you don't indoctrinate the children until they reach the age of reason.
That's super interesting. It's not something that I usually come across in these types of situations. A lot of the time, parents want to get the children as young as humanly possible. The earlier, the better. But Mormons believe in the age of accountability or whatever. I think it's 8 years old or something. They still teach them about Mormonism. They just, if they're not baptized by 8 or whatever, then they're in a lot of trouble, pretty much.
Fortunately.
And what age is that?
That's usually determined to be 7 or 8 years old.
Oh, okay.
So there was an old Jesuit saying that if you give me a child until he is 7, I will show you the man. Because if you indoctrinate children into religion in those formative years, you can utterly stunt their development of critical thinking, such that many people never recover from it and can never tell truth, fact from fiction. But I was fortunate in that my family had it a little backwards, so that on my 8th birthday, my mother came into my room with a Bible in hand, instructing me to read the Bible because this is the absolute truth and the word of God and all of that. But by that time, I was already in 2nd grade. I'd already seen a book on dinosaurs with cladograms and that sort of thing, and I understood what evolution was.
See, that's why, a lot of the time churches try to indoctrinate the kids as young as humanly possible. That's why Kent Hovind, for example, has a whole series of things for children, a book on dinosaurs, Dinosaur Adventureland, and all that other garbage. That's why Ken Ham did the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter and all of that other stuff. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses have Caleb and Sophia, because the younger you get them, the harder it is for them to escape. Indoctrination techniques, disgusting, man.
So it was impossible for me to read Genesis as if it's talking about an actual talking snake and cursed trees as if they were literal trees that you could chop down and build a canoe out of. It was clearly parable. These were obviously metaphor.
Oh, it absolutely was. Here's the even more interesting part. The Bible doesn't say that Satan was in the Garden of Eden. At no point does it even imply that Satan was in the Garden of Eden and deceived Eve. It was a snake that deceived Eve, supposedly, not Satan. Jews didn't even have a concept for Satan at the time. To my knowledge, they don't have a concept for Satan at all. But Christians ran with it, made assumptions about it, made it seem a little bit more plausible within their worldview. When it was all complete nonsense. They made all of it up, all of it. It was garbage from the beginning.
And I understood that at 8.
And did you tell your mother that at the time when she came in with the Bible?
Oh, yeah.
And what did she say?
She dragged me out to meet to confront my grandparents about this. And
uh-oh. See, here's one more mistake that Aron Ra made, in my opinion. First mistake he made, taking this guy seriously. He's, I don't insult people. I don't insult people. He's just not the brightest bulb in the box. Put it that way. I don't feel like that's an insult. I feel like it's an honest assessment. First of all, taking him too seriously was the first mistake. Mistake number 2, giving away too much information about his personal life. If he had taken this less seriously, he may not have done that because, this guy will do everything he can to use it against you, basically.
After I had read the Bible, and I think this was actually a later occasion when I tried reading it again at 11 because the fight just went on for a long time. But it was either 8 or 11 when I came up with an understanding of what Genesis had meant to say and that what the metaphor is, that it's talking about how you can never go home again. That's a common colloquialism. That once you can either remain as you are, like the rest of the animals, unchanged forever, or you can learn morality, essentially, and then you will no longer be like the other animals. You would be like unto God. And so and you can't give women credit for this sort of thing because the Middle Eastern cultures could never give women credit for anything. I mean, when you go out to the Old West and it's always men, then there's gunfights and all of that. But when women show up, now they're going to church on Sundays and everybody has to behave themselves, So we have to give credit to women to some degree for their establishment of civilization. But of course, as I said, the Middle Eastern cultures that wrote the story wouldn't give credit to women.
That's a super interesting interpretation, right? I don't know. Aron Ra honestly, the dude gives so many interesting insights and ideas and interpretations into meanings, intents and things like that of not just of the Bible, but, gives a lot of insight into taxonomy, geology. I mean, he's so interesting, honestly.
So instead, they label it as a bad thing and that it's women's fault. And they couldn't give women credit for that either unless she was misled by somebody else. So they create this talking snake character.
Have you noticed that every time you listen to the woman, you suffer?
He says the woman. What he means is women. Every time you listen to women, you suffer. That's what he said. And he said it as a joke. And again, Aron Ra he seems to be giving this guy like a good faith effort, He views him as like a good faith actor right now. And just some disagreements is all. Unfortunately, the guy's not good faith. He's a scumbag. And again, I don't want to insult anybody here. I don't feel like I'm really insulting anybody. I feel like I'm trying to give an honest assessment of this guy and his motives and position. And it's just, I don't know. It's just wrong. It's just sad that Jesse Lee Peterson is the way that he is.
I'm a married man, and I'm not going to go there.
When
I mentioned this to my grandparents, my grandfather particularly freaked out. He said, "Well, then what is the meaning of life?" And that question confused me. That's a nonsense question.
Yeah.
It's like when
it's like asking, what is the meaning of a mountain? What is the meaning of, a piece of pie? There is no meaning to it, really. You make your own meaning. You create your own interests and, your own value in life. That's really what you do. That's the way I do it. That's the way pretty much every atheist does it. So,
imagine
Why is that a nonsense question?
Well, imagine the stereotypical fortune teller, right? They always take something completely random, like shuffling a deck of tarot cards, or casting the tea leaves, or casting the chicken bones, according to whatever tradition, and then they read what that means, right?
Right.
Well, it doesn't mean anything. It's completely random. They're just coming up with interpretations so that they can sell you something and get a couple of pieces of silver out of it. That's all that means. So asking what life means implies that there was an intended purpose to it, which, again, the construct of everything we see about life in the biosphere and the biodiversity that we have and all of that, not just today, but in past times, and it shows pretty clearly this was not an intended design. And my family just couldn't get around that. They had to imagine that they were the reason the universe existed, that it was all created just for them. And when I said that, no, we are insignificant, we are just momentary glimpses in this in the cosmic sphere, that we only occupy this, like, 0.0 to the 23rd power little fraction of it, and only for a millisecond, and then that's it. We are not the reason the universe exists. The universe existed long before us. It will exist long after us. But when I said that, I was accused of being arrogant.
As a kid?
They accused me of being arrogant. And
when in reality, it was the family that was showing their arrogance. That's the idea here. And I totally agree with Aron Ra. There is a level of arrogance and kind of self-centeredness that comes with the evangelical mindset, not necessarily with the religious mindset, being a Christian or whatever. I have no issue with that, but being an evangelical and believing the way that evangelical extremist nutcases do, by and large, there is definitely a level of arrogance that comes along with it, for sure.
saying that it was humble of them to assume that God created the universe just for them.
And so when your mother brought the Bible into the room for you and told you, hey, read this, this is what it's all about, and you refused to do it.
I did read it.
Oh, why did she take you to your grandparents?
Because I came up with a different interpretation than she did.
Oh,
I
I
saw
see.
it as a metaphor. I didn't read it literally. How could I read it literally? Snakes can't talk.
And so,
right. And again, a lot of Christians think that it was actually saying that Satan was in the garden. It doesn't say that. It says it's a snake, not Satan.
you went to your father and told your father to tell your mother to back off. When you asked your father to tell your mother to back off, what did he say to your mother? Did he tell her to back off?
Oh, no. My father and my mother were already divorced by that time.
Oh.
And they were in very different spheres. Although my dad was never a critical thinker either, I'm sorry to say. He once went to go see a magic show.
See, I would be super cautious about telling Jesse Lee Peterson absolutely anything about my life, because I would worry that he would use it against me. This dude is just terrible in every way. You and Aron are some of the first YouTube atheists I came across some years ago. Been following you faithfully ever since. Thanks, man. Oh, I appreciate that. That's awesome, RJ. Yeah, Aron Ra is a pretty cool guy. He's been around for, like, ever, too. He's been in the sphere since, 10, 15 years or something. I've been in the sphere for 6 or 7 years, I believe. So, yeah, Aron Ra is pretty cool.
When I was 19, he lived in Las Vegas. He went to go see a magic show, and he came back after watching Doug Henning, and he said that Doug Henning was not just doing illusions, but that he was doing real magic. And I was deeply disappointed in my father for not having any critical thought that way.
How old were you at that time?
I was 19.
Oh, okay. And who were you closest to, your father or your mother?
Oh, I'd have to say definitely my mother, because my father was...
You know what that means? That means he's a beta. When I say that, I mean, I'm just joking, obviously. I don't think that. But when I say that, beta, that is Jesse Lee Peterson's thing. That's where that comes from, Jesse Lee Peterson. He says it just like that. He also says amazing like that.
intolerant of anyone who was different than him. And it wouldn't matter how many similarities you had with him, he would focus on the thing that's different and not let that go.
And what did he think of you being an atheist?
We didn't have a lot of time to discuss that. It was right toward the end of his life when he realized that I was atheist, and also that I was stronger than he expected me to be. And so we had one discussion about it. He had seen one of the videos that I'd done early on in my career, and he says, "Well, that don't prove there's no God." And I said, "We don't need to prove that there's no God. If there's no support for the assertion in the first place, we don't need to disprove. If somebody thinks that they see pink elephants, we don't have to prove that pink elephants don't exist. He's making the assertion. It is incumbent upon him to show that there are elephants. And if he fails that, if nobody can show that there's evidence of pink elephants and they're not even possible in the first place, then we don't believe that. That is dismissed."
And so
I think my dad understood that, because on his deathbed, my mother asked whether he wanted to have the missionaries come by and pray over him, and his eyes darted to mine, and he says, "No, I think it's too late for that."
amazing. And that meant what to you?
That's super interesting, right? What an interesting story. Again, that's not something that I would have told Jesse Lee Peterson, probably, because this guy has he's a white supremacist extremist. He uses anything he can against you to further the propaganda and confuse the situation.
I don't want to put words in a dying man's mouth. I was never able to ask him what that meant, nor did I want to push the issue at that time. I think that he was thinking past that.
Oh, I see.
That he understood the argument that I gave him. I don't know that, but that's what it looked like to me.
When you say your father thought that you were stronger than your father didn't think you were stronger than you were, what do you mean by that?
My dad always had a rule that we the boys, his sons, were all supposed to be. We were supposed to grow up to be dangerous, scary men among men. That other people had to fear us and all of that, and it's
probably why Aron dresses like metal Dracula now. I think I saw that description of him in like the Reddit post.
That was the attitude that he had. And once upon a time, I was asking to reschedule a flight while he met per his request. And I remember asking somebody, "I'd like to reschedule this flight, please." And because I said the word please, he reached out and hit me, because you don't say please. You grab the world by the throat and make it give you what you want. That was his attitude. And my thought is, I'm dealing with a customer service person. If I'm polite, they were more likely to oblige my request.
So instead of going with like a super tough alpha male, I get what I want type of philosophy, Aron Ra was kind of using his head, taking a more intellectual approach. Like, if I do this, then it will work out better for me. It's interesting, right?
And if I'm rude, they are more likely to refuse me, just out of spite. I've worked in customer service. I know that works.
And so, did you love your father?
I did, despite all of the long list of terrible things that I heard about him. There were also, as with everybody, there were also positives. And so I just had to put away all of the things that I knew that he did 30, 40 years earlier, and just focus on our relationship as it stands now.
And did you forgive him before he expired?
To a large degree, yes.
Did you tell him that?
I don't think I had to.
And why not?
I think he understood. I think we seemed to understand each other pretty well at the end.
And when you say to a large degree, but why not the whole degree?
Well, I don't want to say that I've forgotten everything that he's done. I mean, we still have to keep our judgment sane. I bear in mind behaviors that he had, and that when he realized he was terminal, he significantly changed. So, but I realized there was a pre-terminal version of him that was very different. I went up to 5 years at a time, multiple times, without speaking to my dad at all.
Yeah, I didn't talk to my dad for 10 years before he died.
Because it wouldn't matter how I tried to connect with him, he would find that difference and use that as a means of starting a fight. And it was, as I said, it wasn't until the last few years of his life that he stopped doing that, and that allowed me, to forgive the rest.
When you say your father got upset because you said please to the worker, who
Yeah.
taught you to say hello and thank you, please?
Yeah, so again, Jesse Lee Peterson zeroes in on mothers and believes that everything wrong with your life at every point is always the result of what your mother did to you. If you had just done what your father wanted you to do instead of what your mother wanted you to do, you wouldn't be a beta. He says that beta attitudes come from mothers, not fathers, and you need to be an alpha instead of a beta. So that's kind of his whole philosophy. It's ass backwards, toxic as hell, wrong on every level, just nonsense. But yeah, that's what he believes generally.
That's just common society. That's how people talk.
Did anyone say to you at any point in life to say thanks?
I'm sure. I mean, kindergarten, first grade,
Did your
they
mother
teach
teach you
everybody
that? To say please and thanks?
See, he zeroes in on the moms, always.
I'm pretty sure everybody taught kids to. Mr. Rogers taught kids to say please and thanks.
But did your mother
Sesame
teach you
Street
to
did.
say please and thanks?
I'm sure she did. Everybody did.
And so why would she need to tell you that to do that if you already knew to do it?
I just told you everybody teaches children to do that.
So was it right for your mother to teach you to say hello and thank you, please?
He's looking for a no. It wasn't, but it was. The whole moral of Aron Ra's story was that yes, please and thank you is good.
Was it right for your mother to teach you that?
Well, that is the right kind of behavior. Had she not taught me, I would have learned it elsewhere. Had nobody actually said, you should say please and thank you, I would still have known it.
So
because I live in this society and this is how people talk to each other.
Right. So was it right for your mother to teach you to say hello and thank you, please?
If that's the way that society functions, this is a pro-social society, then yes. And so this is...
He's like aghast at this stupid, ridiculous question. But yeah, man, this is Jesse Lee Peterson. That's who this dude is. It's bizarre and weird and confusing, but that's what he's all about, baby.
The same message is being reinforced through every source, so yes.
So what made you accept your mother telling you to say please and your father telling you no, don't say that?
Well, I guess
why would you reject one and accept the other?
Well, one, because the entirety of society was on my mother's side, and my dad only acted like that with me once. I told you I went long time without ever speaking to him, repeatedly, specifically because he was so rude.
And so did you identify with your father in the same manner that your mother identified with him?
I don't know how my mother identified with him. I saw them as being violently different people.
And so, your mother was more violent toward your father than your father?
No, they're very different people.
Your mother was violent?
No.
Oh my God, he shouldn't have used the word violent. Ugh. This is Jesse Lee Peterson for you, man. The dude acts stupid intentionally. I don't think that he is. He acts like an idiot 24/7.
No, I mean violently different. I mean they are so dramatically different. Let me say dramatically different instead of violently different. Okay.
Okay. What's the difference between your mother and your father?
My mother is active in her church. She has a position in her church. She's always had it. She's always known what denomination she is, even if she doesn't know much of anything else.
Oh boy. A church that allows women a position of authority? That's not something Jesse Lee Peterson would appreciate.
Whereas my father's side of the family never cracked open a Bible. They don't know what a creed is. They don't care what the Bible says. But they're better than me because they're Christian. And they don't even use the word Christian. As my dad put it, he says, I just believe in the man upstairs. And that was the extent of their theology.
So you're saying that your father was a better person than your mother because your mother was hiding behind the church and your father revealed himself. That's the
don't know if that.
difference?
No,
Because you
I
notice
wouldn't.
that the church women are the worst ones. They hide behind the Bible.
Well, sadly, no, because she didn't do as much Bible study as I did, and he did none
But
none at
she
all.
hid behind the church.
She had an
I don't think I fully understand this line of questioning.
she identified with the church, yes, and many times we would talk about, what I've asked her a number of times, what do you believe? And she says that she believes what her church believes.
But you notice in
yeah,
the
but-
home she raised hell. That's why your father was violent to her because
He never said that. He never said that she raised hell in the home or whatever, did he?
No,
he
no, no.
couldn't
My
deal
father
with
was
it.
not. My
He
father
couldn't
was
deal
not
with the
violent
hell.
to her.
He couldn't deal with the
My-
hell that was
my-
in her.
My father was not violent to her. I never implied that in
I
any
thought
way.
you meant that you said they argue a lot, right?
Well, they argued a lot. Yes, they got divorced.
That's what I meant. And
So-
did you notice that your father couldn't deal with the hell than your mother, even though your mother was going to church? But in the home, she was hell.
Dude, this is bad. This guy is ridiculous. Oh, hey, I encountered this debate on mainstream Reddit last night. Yeah. Me too. That's why I was watching it. I thought it was pretty interesting.
To pay.
I don't think that my father thought of himself as non-religious. They were both pretty much the same in that respect.
Okay, that was my fault getting hit by the sun.
But did
So
you
it was-
notice that your father couldn't deal with the hell than your mother?
I was maybe 4 when they got divorced.
Right.
So I have virtually no memory of them being together. I have very sketchy memories
That was my fault again. I suck.
of being 4 or younger,
When she
much
was
less how they dealt with each other.
when she would speak of your father as you grew up, what would she say?
Oh, for a decade or at least, both of them would tell me terrible things about the other.
See, that's something that Jesse Lee Peterson expects from a woman because they have hell in them in his mind. Not something that he expects, accepts, or believes about a man. Because men are alphas by default and women are beta.
As if you could, as if one parent could turn the child against the other parent by telling them, your mother or your father are bad because X, right?
Right.
And I've had to tell both of them. As a child, I had to tell both of them that you can't win this. You can't tell me that my dad did this evil thing, and Dad, you can't tell me what a horrible person my mother is because it doesn't matter. You're my dad, she's my mom. That's not changing. Same thing. I had the same conversation with my mother. I couldn't believe that I, as a child, had to explain this to adults that you're not going to be able to poison me against the other parent. Shut up.
Good, man. Let me ask, if you were to say to your wife, back off, I'm not listening to you, because and I think you agree that whenever the man listens to the woman, he suffers. What would happen if you stopped listening to her and you just led the way and she followed?
Okay, well, I don't agree that any time, it's funny when two men say something like that if we're both married and we both have past experience with wives, because we do have.
Right, so he's starting to realize that Jesse Lee Peterson is like just ass backwards in the way that he views things. And he wasn't joking when he laughed at that. So now he's got to set the record straight and make sure that he understands that he does not, he doesn't accept misogyny.
A common experience there, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. Certainly it doesn't mean that it's always true.
But have you noticed that every time you listen to her, you suffer?
No, I don't.
Why you haven't paid attention to that?
Because
You see how he frames the question, right? It's not like, haven't you noticed that this is happening? Jesse Lee Peterson knows absolutely nothing about this guy's life. And he says, no, this is ridiculous. And he says, well, then you haven't been paying attention to it. It's definitely happening in Jesse Lee Peterson's mind. If you don't see it, then it's because you're not watching. That's how he frames things up. It's just ridiculous.
it's not true. I mean, there's a lot of things that she says that I disagree with, but I'll tell her that I disagree with them. And there are some things that she tells me that are actually good ideas. So
How does she react when you correct her for being wrong?
See, again, in Jesse Lee Peterson's mind, he believes that women are just wrong. They're wrong constantly, and men have to come in and fix it like they're babies, you know? And I don't think Aron Ra realized that up front, because he may have watched some of his stuff, but not a lot. If he'd watched a lot of his stuff like I have, like so much content from this guy, unfortunately, then he would know that this guy is just terrible in every way. He's just misogynistic and awful.
it's never comfortable. You know, there's always an argument.
Does she remind you of your mother?
No,
She's just like your mama.
no.
Yeah, Jesse Lee Peterson believes that all people only ever marry other people who are like their parents. So women marry people who are like their fathers, and men marry people who are like their mothers. Every time, always. That's just what people do in this guy's mind. In every situation.
No.
She's not.
Um,
My mother is not like my wife at all.
which is worse, your mother or your wife?
See how he's framing it up? Which is worse, your mother or your wife? Because they're both bad in Jesse Lee Peterson's mind. By default, they're bad. But Aron doesn't really, he wasn't expecting something like that. Like, he wasn't expecting the guy's head to be there, to be in a space where all women are bad like that.
That is a very personal question. My mother has issues with the religion and such that my wife is not plagued with. So my wife has a natural handicap that my wife does not. When I met my wife, she was a believer, but not in the way that my mother was. My mother is one of those people who believes not just without reason, but against all reason.
I'll tell you this about Aron Ra and his wife. He takes care of her like nobody else. He will go and do debates anywhere. He'll show up to any conference. He'll, give talks, speeches, or whatever. But if you expect him to come, then you have to make sure that there's a place for his wife too. And she will always be there by his side. I ran Faithless Forum and had him there multiple years in a row. I think we did 3 Faithless Forums. He was there at all 3. And we brought him and we brought his wife in. We didn't have to fly him in or anything like that because they were held in Texas right down the road from him. But, if there's a VIP event, his wife was going to have a seat there. If there was a book signing, his wife would be there with him. Everywhere he went, his wife went with him. And that's just how they did things. If there wasn't room for his wife, then there wasn't room for him either, basically. That was his headspace with it.
So,
which I think is respectable, I feel the same way.
She will believe the belief even when she knows that it's false. She's going to believe it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever encountered people like
Oh
that.
yeah, all the time.
They know that they're wrong, but they're going to believe it anyway. And I don't see the value in lying to yourself. But she does. That's what she does.
So it sounds like your mother's worse than your wife.
That's what I just said. Yes.
And so how did
my wife was a believer, but she was reasonable. So we met online at Christian forums, and we got into an argument over evolution. And unlike every other creationist I've ever debated with, and there have been thousands, my wife asked sincere questions she actually wanted the answers to.
Sounds like his wife was inquisitive. That's the first step to breaking out of this stuff, Oh, God, this is a trick I don't remember how to do. I think you toss it against a wall and then grab it again. This is actually a really hard trick.
Because when you argue with the creationists, they usually ask you things they don't want the answers to. They don't want to know what the answer is. They're looking for that place where you don't know what the answer is, because they think that whatever is unexplained by science is somehow explained by magic, which of course makes no sense. There was a lot of things that we used to believe were supernatural and then we've discovered what the real answer was. And that doesn't mean that before we knew what that answer was, like with epilepsy, for example. I mean, Socrates wrote that people believed that epilepsy was demonic possession. And he already knew that that was wrong, that there had to be a better explanation than that. And so when we didn't know about how the brain functions, well, we didn't know your neuropathy or any of that, that did not mean that our lack of understanding in that meant that God did it. It didn't mean that it was supernatural, that the supernatural explanation was wrong then, even before we knew what the real explanation was.
That is so interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating to see how far along we have come in science and how long ago we knew that something was false. How long ago we knew that, people just weren't informed enough on these subjects. That's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, check me out on Patreon. And let me know if you want to see more stuff like this in the comments. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.